Hello, this is part 2 out of 4 in my latest comparison review series with this large of a source material inspiring just this one movie. I have already covered in the part 1 video the first 7 issues from Scott Snyder's New 52 Batman run, while this video covers the next 5 issues and the annual issue featuring Mr. Freeze. That is something that needs to be talked about in the Interlude section for more than one reason. So, if you came across this video first and ignored the 2 out of 4 in the video title and thumbnail, this is the recommendation to go watch part 1 video first before watching this video, because it follows up from where part 1 left off. I won't waste any more of your time in this opening. Let's go to the Night of the Owls. After having escaped back home from the Labyrinth, Bruce is feeling his pride shattered for not having been able to learn about the Court of Owls' existence before they attacked him. To make that clear, Bruce voiced his depression to Alfred when looking at his renewal project's hologram, by calling himself a fool trying to build a city planning to stab him in the back. And then right on cue, the power is cut from the Wayne Manor as a sign that it is about to be infiltrated. Bruce sends Alfred to the safety of the Batcave, while he himself charges to deal with the intruders, armed in his pajamas, morning robe, contacts, and the darkness of the outage. But neither of them realizes that one of the intruders notices the entrance to the Batcave to follow Alfred, as Bruce is then attacked by multiple Talons, which Alfred reports from the Batcave to be growing in numbers before he is also ambushed. Ignoring the taunts of the Talons, Bruce takes the fight with them outside to the roof, from where he eventually needs to flee via the chimney to the Batcave, to be confronted by the Talon that snuck in. Fortunately, Bruce's arrival distracted the Talon long enough for Alfred to push the giant penny to pin it to the floor to be interrogated, but due to its defiance and the other Talons approaching, Bruce grabs the Talon's interface gauntlet before rushing with Alfred to lock themselves into the cave's armory. Knowing the doors won't hold forever, Bruce has Alfred use the armory's console to the Batcomputer to analyze the microchip from the Talon's gauntlet, while also telling him to drop the temperature of the cave down below 0 degrees to slow down the chemicals powering the Talons. That method of dealing with them is however going to take time they do not have. So Bruce puts the heavier duty bat armors on and dominantly steps out to tell the Talons to get the out of his house. While Batman confronts the Talons, Alfred breaches the security of their microchip to find it contains a list of victims that the Talons had been sent to assassinate for being in the way of the court's grand design. Head accountant, deputy police chief, county judge, deputy mayor, city architect, cultural director, chairman of the city council, Commissioner Gordon, Major Haiti, director of Arkham Asylum. So many people are being targeted that Batman tells Alfred to call everyone he can. Red Robin, Red Hood, Robin, Nightwing, Batgirl, and the Birds of Prey are to be informed about the list of the targets, and told to go protect those they still can from the Talons. Busy fighting the Talons, Batman is told by Alfred that the temperature of the Batcave is slowly going down, and in 5 minutes it should be low enough to start clotting the chemical running through them. While that is a slow process, it gives Batman the excuse not to hold back in fighting against the undead revenants, especially when he is already frustrated about needing to wear a hostile environment bat armor in his own home. Even that is still not enough, as the Talons eventually manage to overpower Batman and force him to fall on his back. Using the mechanical dinosaur trophy buys Batman some time, until he ends up in the same situation he was just in. and has to double task the voice commands of the armory's lock to keep Alfred in safety. But then another form of allies arrives in his time of need, as the cold air of the cave has summoned a swarm of bats to attack the Talons and keep them distracted as they are starting to get immobilized. As Batman removes the armor, he sees one of the Talons attempting to escape, but quickly takes it out by running it over with the Batmobile on his way to Gotham, currently covered by an owl signal. As Batman rushes towards Gotham in the Batmobile, he is updated on the situation with a list of Talon's victims, on which ones have already been rescued by his allies in the tie-in issues of this event, as well as those that cannot be rescued anymore. The only ones left on the list are director Jeremiah Arkham, whose rescue by Batman at Arkham Asylum is covered in the Detective Comics and Lincoln March, to whose rescue Batman appears to arrive too late in finding him mortally wounded with a Talon shot with an armored round. Seemingly knowing that his time is up, Lincoln uses the last of his strength to pass on to Batman 3 names he managed to connect to the Court of Owls, and asks him to pass a message to Bruce Wayne about fighting for Gotham's future, before he finally passes away in Batman's arms. Almost immediately, Batman gets called by Alfred to report how all the Talons have been defeated, and their list of victims has been covered for better and for worse. With the information given to him by Lincoln, Batman decides to pay back to the court for what they have done by destroying their homes. Mr. Freeze escapes from Arkham in the middle of being interviewed about his connection to the Court of Owls, in having created a new form of the chemicals that would have countered their weakness to the cold. After recovering his suit to survive outside sub-zero temperatures, he heads out to meet the Penguin at the Iceberg Lounge, where they quickly get their stories to be told to the cops straight. Long story short, Mr. Freeze is here because the Penguin has been holding onto his freeze gun, which the Penguin allows Mr. Freeze to use on his own security detail to make it look more believable that he came to rob the place. And since there are no more time codes to show what the clock is anymore to do a 24-style clock transition, I might as well summarize how this annual issue went over in reimagining Mr. Freeze's backstory for the New 52. Basically, in this version, Victor Freeze worked for Wayne Enterprises instead of Goth Corp, with Bruce Wayne having been his boss. As for his past marriage to Nora, that is where Scott Snyder really dropped the ball. Before we reach that point, we see Bruce Wayne confronting Victor Freeze in a 6 years ago flashback, during which he is caught using the company equipment for personal use and resisting the security in removing him from the building, which then led to Victor's origin story in becoming Mr. Freeze. See how I never mentioned his wife Nora? Well, that is because Scott Snyder's brilliant idea to update Mr. Freeze for the New 52 was to take away his sympathetic qualities and have Batman, when confronting him returning to Wayne Enterprises, say,
"Victor, you know just as well as I do that is not your wife."
This woman that Mr. Freeze sees as his wife was in reality born in the 1940s and is old enough to be his grandmother, who was born with an incurable disease and placed in suspended animation that her family agreed on. Victor Freeze wrote his doctoral thesis on her and came to work at Wayne Enterprise to be close to her, develop an obsession, and this is the point where the editor should have told Scott Snyder, or to James Tynion IV, who also apparently co-wrote this annual, to stop what they are doing and dial it back a notch. Actually, since most people watching this video likely can't read Finnish from these panels I'm showcasing, let's play with a thought experiment on how Scott Snyder's and James Tynion IV's writing could have been tuned up without forcing Jason Fabok to redraw this issue. For example, remember how in my holiday special video I brought up that Nora Freeze was dead and buried in the Mr. Freeze story that was not adapted into the TNBA episode? As a reminder, the censors overlooking the production of Batman the Animated Series kept the writers from acknowledging that Nora Freeze was supposed to be, as Bruce Timm wanted and Boyd Kirkland when doing the Sub-Zero animated movie didn't get the message, dead. Which so led to the misunderstanding that Nora Freeze could be cured from what put her in the ice in the first place. As a matter of fact, after my holiday special video came out, Serum Lake did a video about the Deep Freeze episode where Mr. Freeze was reunited with Nora in Grant Walker's Oceania to specifically point out that
look at Nora in that tank, she is not frozen. She's already thawed out and she is dead. That's her corpse floating in the liquid. When we saw her in Heart of Ice, she was frozen solid. You couldn't even make out her features. She was just a generic human shape in a tank. Also, Bruce Timm, Paul Dini and director Kevin Altieri have all gone on the record for saying that Nora was intended to be dead. They just couldn't explicitly say that due to the rules of children's television at the time.
So what was the purpose of me bringing that up? Well, obviously because the New 52 back in 2011 did not have the same censors as Batman the Animated Series did. So Scott Snyder and James Tynion IV could have done what Bruce Timm wanted in the first place and make Nora Freeze be dead, with Mr. Freeze being in denial about it rather than believe that she is in a suspended animation. That would have been a better choice to make into Mr. Freeze's New 52 backstory to at the very least keep his marriage rather than take away the appeal of what made him a tragic character. So in a nutshell, they could have rewritten the dialogue in the comic to include how Victor Freeze used to work for Bruce Wayne at Wayne Enterprises. He resisted the arrest when caught using the company equipment to put Nora on ice, and she then died during the accident, with Mr. Freeze's tragedy being that he believes that the ice could have preserved her, like it did with his mother when he was a child. That added backstory was not a bad addition, but the body count of how many people Mr. Freeze kills, from Arkham guards to Penguin security, and almost Nightwing and Robin while trying to make his way to Nora that he was never even married to in the first place, that is where all sympathetic appeal was taken away from this version of Mr. Freeze. Okay, interlude over, now back to Batman's continuing war against the Court of Owls.
Revenge is the prime ingredient in the fountain of youth. I've kept myself alive for hundreds of years with a steady diet of jealousy and hate.
In his war against the Court of Owls, Batman has managed to track down and confront Maria Powers as one of the suspects he got from Lincoln. While Mrs. Powers refuses to tell him anything, she does not deny being a member of the court, so after leaving her locked in her penthouse elevator, Batman has Alfred track down the phone call she attempts to make to her husband. Alfred, while tracking the call to Mr. Powers, also reports back to Batman that the Talons that attacked the Wayne Manor have been put into the Batcave's cryo lab, before finally managing to track down Mrs. Powers' call to an area where Bruce remembers having gotten trapped as a young boy when looking for the court. There was nothing for him to find back then, but this time Batman comes across a similarly anticlimactic discovery, where the entire Court of Owls seems to have unanimously taken each other out of the game. The next day, Bruce is bothered by the anticlimactic end to the Court of Owls, which Alfred reads into being because it was a confrontation taken away from him. Bruce responds to it by feeling like something does not add up with it, but when he is about to move on into taking care of his responsibilities as Bruce Wayne, he realizes something while looking at the portrait of his parents, and tells Alfred to cancel his appointments. A hunch leads him to go as Batman to the morgue and find an invitation inside the empty slab where the remains of Lincoln March should be held. Thinking back to what Lincoln told him before, Batman travels to Willowwood Children's Home, which had indeed been brought down by an unnoticeable sinkhole that then brought attention to its inhumane treatment to the children who lived there. And there Batman is ambushed when announcing his presence to Lincoln, whom Batman has already guessed to be an alias created for him by the court. Lincoln confesses this to be true, along with Batman's other assumptions that he betrayed the court to steal funds from them before setting up an emergency meeting with poison drinks, and having added his own name to the Talon's hit list, to which he had also prepared for by taking the same serum that revives the Talons, making him hard to be killed now by the surviving leaders of the court. Lincoln congratulates Batman in addressing to him as Bruce for having managed to figure all this out, but still wants to hear Batman explain why he ended up doing all of it, while beginning to suit up with one of the latest Talon suits. Batman starts with his first assumptions being that Lincoln had been treated at Willowwood since he lived through the sinkhole incident, which was a truth among the lies creating the cover for his alias. Lincoln admits to that while claiming them to be the same, as seeing Bruce fight William Cobb's Talon at the old Wayne Tower had revealed to him that he is Batman, by not having been the easy target he was supposed to be, and because the Talon had also sent Lincoln to the hospital, he had begun to realize that the court had been using him as well. Batman assumes that Lincoln was always an expendable nobody for the court, but if that was true, then what sent Batman to the morgue to check if Lincoln's body was still there? The pin that Lincoln had told Bruce his mother had worn before dying was the same kind of pin that Bruce's mother had been wearing in multiple pictures taken of her. So Batman saw it as a clue Lincoln took into his fake backstory. Except that Lincoln tells Batman that the mothers whose children were held at Willowwood were given pins like that. So when Batman refuses to even acknowledge the possibility, Lincoln reintroduces himself to Bruce as his brother, Thomas Wayne Jr., who had been born prematurely and brought to recover in Willowwood when it was still a leading children's hospital. But then, after Thomas and Martha Wayne as the biggest financiers were killed by Joe Chill, the activities of the institution changed while leaving their other son to be forgotten in there. And now that other son has resurfaced to confront his brother as Owlman against Batman.
Fight!
Refusing to accept Lincoln's story, Batman charges at him with everything he's got, but the latest Talon suit provides Lincoln an overpowering edge with strength and speed, which he uses to disarm Batman of his cape while ranting about how he blames Bruce for having lived the life robbed of him in Willowwood. Trying to talk back against Lincoln's delusions built up during the years only makes him rant more while throwing Batman through a wall, and then starting to fly him around Gotham's skyline to show his brother his point of view on it when growing up. And then how Lincoln had seen Bruce on television for the first time to recognize him as his brother, who never came to take him home from Willowwood after their parents were killed. But the Owls eventually did, which solidified Lincoln's belief that Bruce had abandoned him. Having told that, Lincoln throws Batman to a passing plane's turbine to make him feel as he did when trapped in Willowwood. But Batman manages to climb his way to the wing, while Lincoln is busy reacting to a small explosive planted to his back during the fight. But the air pressure and the beating he has gotten makes Batman fall and land into one of his rebuilding project's construction sites. There Lincoln picks Batman up again, intending to bury them both in the rubble by blowing it up, and then rising up thanks to his new Talon physiology. before setting off the explosives around the site's support pillars. Lincoln tells Bruce how his introduction to Gotham as Thomas Wayne Jr. had been ruined when Bruce had returned from his training abroad and made it impossible for the Court of Owls to take over the Wayne Enterprises with him as their figurehead. So the identity of Lincoln March was created for him as the beak of the Great Owl. But that was not enough, and even as he now knows he won't get what he wants, Lincoln is going to take what he can get as Gotham's past, as long as he has made sure Batman as its future won't be there. That is where Batman takes his chance to attack back as the explosions begin, by blinding Lincoln and focusing on saving himself from the crumbling skyscraper. Later, after having paid a private investigations to go through the ruins where no bodies were fortunately found, Bruce is once again visited by Dick while he is properly recovering from his injuries, to be once again used as an audience surrogate to be exposited how the Court of Owls with their Talons have so far been defeated, with the former having been sent to lick their wounds and the latter locked below Blackgate. Bruce also shares a foggy childhood memory of his from the age of 3, when he and his parents had been in a car accident which had caused his mother to prematurely go into labor. Bruce barely remembers any of this, but has read the medical report about the stillborn who could have lived a whole life had he not died 12 hours after being born. When Dick asks if there is a possibility that the baby could have survived and transferred to Willowwood for treatment under a false name, Bruce responds by saying that he refuses to believe his parents could have done so, but he did look up into the records to find an unnamed boy having been committed there a week after his brother's death. And then there is how Bruce's mother as a social worker did visit Willowwood in its glory days, so her pin could have been a honorary gift. These are all facts that the Court of Owls picked up and used to create a narrative for Lincoln to believe in being related to the Wayne family. But without a DNA test, it is difficult to verify. And then there is no telling if Lincoln was told this backstory by the court or if he made it up by himself. As of now, Bruce is more focused in looking for more evidence to get over this issue, and tells Dick that he never suspected the court to have been able to turn him into a Talon, because he has proved them otherwise in the years standing by Batman's side as Robin and Nightwing. In the end, Bruce can only feel grateful for this learning experience he got from the Court of Owls, because now Batman knows Gotham better than he initially did, and is readier than ever for when they decide to resurface. Night of the Owls can be seen as a separate story from Court of Owls, because it was one of those first events in the New 52 where the other Batman-related comic titles became tie-in issues, which showed what those characters were doing while Batman was stuck fighting the Talons in the Batcave. Otherwise, it's really the latter half of a larger story, like how Flashpoint is to Flash Rebirth, and in that sense it pretty much comes across as if Scott Snyder wanted to take out the Court of Owls, or take away the power they were first established to have, so that other writers after him could bring them back in a rebuilt form. And then there was how the story ended by setting up a mainstream DC Universe version of Owlman, whom Grant Morrison had initially back in JLA Earth 2 established to be Thomas Wayne Jr. instead of another version of Bruce Wayne. I previously talked about this aspect back in 2022 in my video comparing that comic to the Crisis on 2 Earths movie, which seemed to lean towards this aspect by having Batman and Owlman voiced by different voice actors like William Baldwin and James Woods.
You're talking about killing
everyone who ever lived, whoever will live.
You're insane.
Does it really matter? There are alternate versions of me that you would find quite charming.
What are you planning to do? Talk me to death?
Actually, I thought I beat you to death.
But that movie ended up doing nothing with that connection, and instead chose to try making Batman look cool in sending Owlman to die. However, the idea of a Thomas Wayne Jr. as Batman's brother is older than Grant Morrison's JLA Earth 2. Having first been introduced in World's Finest comic issue 223 back in 1974. In it, we saw Batman, Superman, and Deadman working together in hunting the Boomerang Killer, whom Batman on his end was able to find to be tied to the Willowwood Sanitarium, where the files revealed that the killer was Thomas Wayne Jr., who had been born otherwise healthy, but ended up in a car crash thanks to a neglectful babysitter, and was diagnosed to have a brain damage that would make him, quote, always unstable danger to himself and society. The story happened in one of those lettered Earths for stories that actively disregarded the canon for the story moves the characters instead of the characters moving the story reasons, which, as I mentioned back in my Crisis on Infinite Earths video series, ended up getting destroyed from the multiversal canon eventually, until Grant Morrison made the crime syndicate Owlman to be Thomas Wayne Jr., and Scott Snyder created Lincoln March as the composite character of those two. For some reason, Snyder still decided to flip them out in making Batman be the older brother instead, likely to make Bruce have some memories to support Lincoln's claims and the paper trail on his brother's existence, while still leaving the possibility of Lincoln being his brother up in the air pending on a DNA test. I still prefer to see Owlman as the older brother and Batman as the younger brother in this dynamic, especially when looking at how Greg Capullo drew Lincoln to look like he is taller and older than Bruce is. Scott Snyder did, however, acknowledge the plot hole that did not exist in the pre-crisis, where Alfred came to work for Bruce when he was an adult, and in post-crisis he would have been there to know about Thomas Jr.'s brief existence. So, in the New 52 continuity, Snyder ended up doing this backup story told from the point of view of Alfred's father, Jarvis Pennyworth. Most of what this backup story does is establish that Alfred's father served the Waynes first, when Bruce had already been born, how Martha Wayne as a social activist worked to help schools stay open and funded, with the implication that Bruce got his drive from her. The Court of Owls staged the car accident that caused Martha Wayne to go into labor at the crossing of Lincoln and March. Jarvis once heard Thomas Wayne talk about the baby as if he was still alive, and his fear for the court's talons caused Jarvis to write Alfred a letter not to come work for the Waynes, which was unfortunately never sent as it burned in the fire the Talon set up to hide his murder. Something that Alfred himself in the present day is oblivious of, but now suspects it could have happened after Bruce told him he saw the name Pennyworth written in the court's labyrinth. And the last thing to acknowledge before moving on to work on the Born to Kill video as part 3 is this character's story. Now, as I brought up in the opening of the last video, Dan DiDio as DC Comics co-publisher at the time had made characters like Cassandra Cain and Stephanie Brown blacklisted from being used. So, when Scott Snyder originally wanted to have Cassandra be the one who fished Batman from the river after he escaped the Labyrinth, he ended up creating Harper Row in her place, and the next issue after the Night of the Owls was to establish her as a character. I can only make assumptions with what I have, but the long story short is that after having been forced to replace Cassandra with someone else, Scott Snyder chose this random background character from the first issue at Bruce's event, having been given a winning raffle ticket to attend it, and wrote a story around her to explain why her hair went from this to this. Basically, Harper's gay brother Cullen was bullied for being gay by one-dimensional homophobes, so she cut her hair to support him after those bullies did this to him. And then, because the crime of invading Cullen's privacy and person was not big enough to be reported to police, those persereijät decided to do worse, knowing there wouldn't be consequence for their actions. Well, luckily Batman eventually showed up on this second time, since it was happening on one of the many Gotham alleys, aka where he looks out to intervene with situations like this. This encounter then got Harper interested to see Batman again, and come to notice that Batman uses certain bat boxes in the city system to make sure he is not caught on camera. Harper used one of these boxes to catch a glimpse of Batman going after the criminals that he was interrogating about the Talon attacking the old Wayne Tower back in the third issue. Then she was able to help in a small way to catch his attention, which explains Batman's hostile exit when he left her after being fished from the river. James Tynion IV actually wrote a more extensive backstory on why Batman keeps his distance from Harper in Batman and Robin Eternal back in 2015, but that is a completely separate issue. Harper and Cullen Rowe have also made a few other media appearances, like I recall having seen Harper in the third season of Young Justice, and then they are supposed to be these two in the poster for that Gotham Knights TV show that we should ignore from having ever happened. Okay, and now to go work on Peter Thomas's Born to Kill story arc in the New 52 Batman and Robin comic as the part 3 video. While I am working on that, remember how YouTube works by liking this video, comment about what you think about this latter half of the Court of Owls storyline, about the New 52 Mr. Freeze and how you would have written his story instead, about Lincoln March as Batman's brother and the mainstream DC version of Owlman, or about Harper Rowe's creation. Share this video for more people to see and subscribe for when I will have the next video coming out. Also, ding the bell to be alerted for when I will be doing gaming streams for a chance to chat with me, and may your heart be your guiding key.